Okay, sorry about that, everyone. There was an issue with Zoom, so we're back right now. So please continue. Where were we? Just give me a quick reminder of where we were, guys.
We were on Brexit.
Brexit, yes, thanks.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on Brexit? I mean, I know it's such a contentious topic, and as someone who from South Africa living over here, I was obviously not part of the voting process, so I don't feel the same level of partiality towards Leave or towards Remain or anything. I can see arguments made in favor of both, but I also fully disagree with this whole notion that all Leavers are idiots and all Remainers are geniuses and all that nonsense. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
I would like to hear your thoughts on this whole topic.
I agree. I don't want to get too political, obviously.
No,
I think,
of course not.
The decision was made in, when was it, June 16, almost 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Next week, isn't it? 23rd of June, 4 years ago next week. The decision was made. Whether you agree with the decision or not, this is a democracy, and that is how we settle differences at the ballot box. So that decision, therefore, needed to be implemented, and it was implemented, in January when we did leave. I think you can't, not necessarily just with Brexit, but even with an election where you elect, MPs, you can't say people are thick for voting one way and intelligent for voting the other. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. Everyone is entitled to a vote, and they can vote how they choose. But my view on it is, there are arguments for both sides, but we voted to come out, and therefore we needed to come out. That decision has to be, put in place, respected, and carried out, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, absolutely. And I'm trying to think back to the time, to 2016, when it all was happening. You had the build up to it. So I was just too young to vote by about a month. So it wasn't something that was on my list at the time. Obviously, it was a hot topic. But what I distinctly remember was that it's like you said, you had both sides were saying, "Oh, you're an idiot for wanting to leave. Oh, you're stupid for wanting to remain," and vice versa. And everyone online was throwing just crap at each other for thinking one way or the other. And it's like you said, Mike, there's data to support both. But unfortunately, you had, I remember all the things with the Boris bus, and there was controversy about that, and then that was resolved just a bit earlier. But there was so much contradictory and inflammatory information and rhetoric, and it was such an incredibly divisive topic that you just sort of didn't know which way to go. And you're thinking, oh, well, all my friends are voting Leave, I should vote Leave as well. And I think, or vice versa. And I think a lot of people were probably influenced by the psychology of their peer group, who in turn were probably influenced by the psychology of whoever was important at their life at the time and whatever. So it was, and obviously the margins were thin, because it was 52, 48,
48,
give or take a few pips, but it was just one of the strangest periods, because you had everyone fighting each other. And then now down the line, you're looking at data and you're thinking, well, actually, I'm still not sure entirely what the right choice is.
Not what the impact was, And I think the other thing is, if you look at what was going on, in 2016, 17, it was that big push for change. We had it here with the Brexit vote. They had it in the US when Trump was elected. You had it in France shortly after, where Marine Le Pen got into the final round of voting for the presidency against Macron. And it was all just this push for something different, for change, for better or for worse. And that kind of swept across, all sort of Western democracies, if you like. But thinking back to the campaign, it was very much, the Remain side saying there will be economic pain ahead if you vote to leave, and the Leave side saying we can do better as an independent country if we're freed from the shackles of the EU. And I think, just speaking personally, since the referendum, well, we will never know what the impact would have been if we voted to stay in. But you still can't be sure what the right decision was even now.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, until the actual outcome, we have no clue what's going to happen. And I read this thing a while ago. Can't remember in which book it was, but the anticipation of pain often is to be perceived to be far worse than actual pain itself. And I think that's one of the things that we faced over here, is that there's this constant anticipation of the pain that's meant to come. It's like, for instance, if you're naughty and your parents send you to your room and you're like, oh shit, what's going to happen now? What punishment's coming next? So effectively, the UK has been told to go to its room, and sit in the corner until we are ready to come out and tell you what your punishment will be. And I think both sides of the camp are looking at the same issue, but from different perspectives. It's like, one is saying, yes, now we get our freedom. Other one is like, oh crap, here comes our punishment. And who's correct? I don't know. I have no idea. But
I'm not sure we'll ever know.
No.
To be honest with you, I don't think, it's all counterfactuals. How will you ever know what would have happened if we'd stayed in?
Yeah,
you just don't know. It's like saying, what would have happened if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister last December? You don't know. These are all things that you're just never going to know the answers to. I mean, that won't stop the Brexit question being debated forevermore, but you're just never going to know the answer to it.
I just think that we are in a very privileged position, and while we still have the goodwill of the rest of the world wanting to do business with us over here, the currency should still remain relatively strong. I mean, having a pound at parity to the dollar is not such a bad thing, for exports and all that kind of stuff. It's quite shit if you want to import a lot of things. But I mean, if you turn it into a more export-based economy, or if you even a service economy where you just theoretically export the services from here, hell, that could actually be quite beneficial in so many ways. So I try to look at it from both perspectives, as to saying, oh well, it's horrible if it goes down, and it's fantastic if it goes up, because it cuts both ways.
Exactly. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying at the start in terms of, each side of a trade. There's a winner and a loser from everything. And as you say, if you're exporting, where sterling is now compared to where it was 4 years ago, is absolutely brilliant for you. But if you're importing, then it's not, it's not ideal at all. And I think, there is too much of a notion is cable goes up, that's good. Cable goes down, it's bad. And that's not necessarily true, is it?
No, and I think it's the same with markets. Well, what do you think, Jamie?
Yeah.
No, I think that point about cable up good, cable down bad is very true, because I think some people at least view pound strength as like a sign of like pride. If you're British and you kind of say anything, oh, the pound's going up, fantastic, we're on top of the world. And you see it even with people you talk to, like if the pound, the pound was at like 135 after the election in December. People saying, oh, this is fantastic. The pound has skyrocketed. Our economy is going to be fantastic and everything. But like you said, Adrian, it cuts both ways for importers and exporters, where there's sort of trade-offs for both on a currency front. And then, like you said, Mike, with the counterfactuals, obviously you don't know what would have happened because the alternative didn't happen. And actually, leading on from that point, and changing the topic slightly, is I've seen a lot, less so now, but maybe in the last few weeks or month, was the emergence of some of this writing about lockdown in the UK was so unnecessary, and we didn't need it because look at cases, they haven't even been that bad. And then I was kind of left scratching my head, thinking, oh well, surely cases aren't bad because we locked down. Like a few people just like ignoring that point, and
correlation and causation. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's like Trump said a few weeks ago in a press conference. I think he said something like, "If we stopped testing for coronavirus, we wouldn't have any cases." Well, yeah, of course. That's called ignoring the problem.
Yeah. Sticking. Well, we know ostriches don't do this, but it's like sticking your hand and head into the sand kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or a child doing this. You can't see me.
Yeah. If I don't look for it, it doesn't exist, and I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, but you know what? There's a guy. Just building onto your point, Jamie. There's a guy, a movement specialist. I'm big into calisthenics and weight training and all that kind of stuff. And there's a guy whose work I follow called Ido Portal, and he's a movement specialist and coach. And he made this really incredible point where he said that one of the things with information is that it is very addictive, and it becomes toxic. And eventually there is a point where it does not help with your overall development and growth anymore. And I think the same can be said about a lot of the information and things that we are speaking of over here, is that how much fucking information how much more information do we need to be able to make a good decision? You know, do you need a stack this high to be able to make good decisions, or can you use a stack this high and still make a very good decision? And that is the key question over here, because I think we live in a world nowadays where we think the more information we throw at something, the more information and the more data we throw at something, the better the decision making will be. I disagree. I think more often than not that can cause analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
And I think definitely. Go on, Mike. You go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say very quickly. I think the most important thing is that a decision is made, because the worst thing to do is just sit there and read and not make any decision at all and just wait. You know, at least someone has gone, this is whatever it is, this is the decision, this is what's happening.
No, I think that's a very good point. You do have to be pragmatic and have to make a decision at some point, because otherwise, if you're just sitting there waiting for more, the alternative is worse. But the point I wanted to make was that no human is a computer, obviously, right? So we're not a computer insofar as the more information you throw at us, we can still continue to make outcomes and decisions on an informed basis, just because you've thrown more information. I mean, we're not sitting in Renaissance Technologies offices and James Simon's there, get more data, because the black box is going to spit out even better decisions. At the end of the day, humans and policymakers are people. You're just that. And the marginal benefit at a certain point of throwing more information at a person, at a government, at a collection of people, becomes negative.
Yeah.
And then obviously you saw that with the Brexit debate, where just more information, and then you had two sides taking completely opposing views. And I think once you get to that stage, that's when you know, like, the data is just pointless, completely pointless. Because if you can take two people, sit them down, make the same piece of information, and they come to two separate conclusions, how useful is it?
I completely agree.
I was actually reading something about that in Talib's Black Swan, where you can have, exactly as you said, you can have the same piece of data and have two completely opposing views depending on the way that the person interprets it. So it shows you that data alone is not enough for great decision making. And I'm of the opinion that decision making is more of a skill and an art form than something you're just born with. You're not just born with the ability to make good decisions. It's something you need to cultivate. And I think in trading terms, it's exactly the same thing. Because getting back to the green lumber problem, how is it that a guy who wrote the book, How I Lost $1 Million, and the lessons that I learned from it, literally lost $1 million while knowing everything that there was to know about trading green lumber? And then you get this guy whom he knew called Joe Siegel, who had traded for decades and made a fortune, thought that green lumber was lumber painted green. I mean, what the hell? I mean, seriously, he thought that there was actually lumber painted green, and he made a freaking fortune off it. And this guy knew everything there was to know. So what does that tell you? Is that we think that we need to be so incredibly smart to make money, but there is actually very little correlation between making money and actually being smart. It's like this saying that I'm going to let you guys build onto this. It's like a saying that I heard from a guy I was friendly with. He's some kind of scientist. He's got more freaking BScs and PhDs than what I care to even mention. And he said people would often ask him, "You're so smart. Why aren't you rich?" Then he would say, "Well, you're so rich. Why aren't you smart?" And I thought it does ring true, because not all smart people are rich, and not all rich people are smart, and not all the best traders are necessarily even smart people, but they know how to make money. So
yeah, and that's all you need to do.
Yeah,
and
I think it raises
in this industry.
Yeah, I think it raises, leading on from that smartness point, is how are you going to define intelligence? Are you going to use IQ? Are you going to use some other measure? Because obviously any method that you use will have its flaws. There's not going to be any perfect indicator. There's not going to be any perfect measure of intelligence that captures perfectly, at least today, across the board, a person's intelligence, because it's sort of an intangible concept, intelligence. And I think I don't know, sometimes I go on Twitter and you look at like Taleb's Twitter feed, and he's bashing someone one way, and then the other time he's getting out, he's blocking people all over the place. But he does sometimes on his Twitter make some good posts about IQ, and I think from the data that they found is that IQ is a good predictor of unintelligence. So if you have a score below 100, then it has some predictive value in showing your future or something. But past 100, there's kind of a divergence between predictive success for your individual success. So you could take two people with an IQ of 140, and they could have vastly different places in life. That could have vastly different outcomes and wealth and whatnot. So it's difficult, and then to measure intelligence properly. And then also from that green lumber problem, another thing you get is that, well, clearly markets must be hyper efficient. If the guy who knows everything about green lumber is losing money, then the guy who thinks green lumber is something completely different is making money. And then you see that sort of same problem popping up from time to time, where I remember when Zoom was becoming a big thing, I think loads of people were buying the wrong Zoom ticker, buying the wrong stock, and one stock went up 500%, the other one went up 5%, and then they found out, oh wait, this is the wrong Zoom. The real Zoom didn't even go up much, and then the fake Zoom completely plummeted, and you're like, oh, it makes no sense.
That happened quite recently as well. There's a Chinese firm, I can't remember their name now, but their ticker is FAANG. So everyone thinks,
oh my gosh,
Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google bought the hell out of it. And the company were going, why is our stock going up so much? And it was because people thought they were buying a basket of tech stocks rather than some obscure Chinese company that no one had ever heard of.
Yeah, well, that just illustrates it. And, to build on to your point, Jamie, about the differences in IQ and stuff, and I feel that this is something that's really important for people to take note of, because there are going to be many people who enter the markets and they think they need to have a specific level of IQ and whatnot to make success. I personally disagree. I think, as you said, if you're above 100, you should be okay. The point that you were making about unintelligence is if you have an IQ below 83, you're not allowed to be enlisted into the US Army, or armed forces or anything like that. Because they say if you have an IQ below 83, any knowledge that you gain could be used with very destructive effect, especially if it's something in a military kind of region area. So that's why you are simply disallowed from entry. But to use a real world example, have you heard of a chess player called Bobby Fischer by any chance?
Nope.
The name does ring a bell.
No.
Okay, well, Bobby Fischer was a world champion chess player back in the 60s and 70s, if I recall correctly. And he at the age of 12, he was a world champion. Now, if I can picture this, at the age of 12, beating grandmasters in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and so on, literally wiping the floor with them. He had the ability to, I think, if I recall correctly, think 7 or 8 moves ahead. So every move that you made, he would be able to. he was 6, 7, or 8 ahead of you. That is ridiculous. And I play chess, and I can think one, maybe 2 moves ahead if I'm really in my stride. But 8 moves for every move that you make, you could think 8 moves ahead. That is crazy. He had an IQ of 180 plus. They couldn't measure an IQ above 180 at that stage. But guess what he could do? Play chess and read comic books. That's all he could do with his 180 plus IQ. His brain was not equipped, in spite of that high level of intelligence, to be able to do anything else beyond that. And I think that we face, we do face a similar kind of thing as well, where I'd rather be a great generalist than a specialist in my thinking, where all I can do is proverbially play chess and read comic books, because damn, that limits you, especially in markets where you need, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's a good point. And again, I'll bring it back to marginal utility. If you think you keep going, your IQ keeps pumping up, but at what point does the usefulness kind of tick off? At what point does the IQ so great that, like you were mentioning earlier, Mike, was that you lose sight of pragmatism, where you just can't make a decision because it's analysis paralysis, and you're stuck there. You're thinking 8 moves ahead. You think, oh, well, I'll do this move, he'll do this, and and you think trying to find the optimal outcome. But because you're so good at looking into the future on a chessboard, say, although that probably wasn't the case for him because he did quite well, you're looking so far ahead that you just think, oh, I can't make a decision. There's too many options. There's too much information out there. And I guess that links it back nicely to all the other things you've been saying about where information overload is a bad thing.
No, it is a bad thing. Absolutely. And, I don't want to delve too deeply into this because we could carry on all day. But, I mean, if you take, let's take a chessboard, because the market kind of feels like a chessboard in so many ways. And I think this analogy could go really well. I think by the time you've made both players have made 5 or 6 moves, there are 129 million possible games or potential moves that could be made just after the 5th move or something like that. And every chess game has a possible number of outcomes equal to 10 to the power of 128, if I recall correctly. And I mean, if you take that number, to put that into context, that is a greater number than the number of atoms, or estimated number of atoms, in the observable universe, just on a freaking chessboard. So if there are that many variables in that kind of game, can you imagine how many variables are there in markets that we might not even be aware of? You know, where you have millions of people coming together, all their separate views, and one of the things that I've come across, well, it shouldn't be too hard. It can only go up or down. Jesus, if you think it were that simple, don't you think more people would make money? Sorry, Tom. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and that's a good analogy, because if you're trying to think 8 moves ahead in the market, you're just going to get yourself tied up in knots. And you'll never do anything, like you were saying a minute ago, Jamie. So, yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to get your opinion as well. Now that we are, discussing FX and all that. What do you see emerging market currencies doing? Because they're obviously risk off, especially in these kind of environments. But
I think I don't spend too much time looking at EM, but I think it's going to struggle now because it's risk off. Secondly, because EM seems to be having real problems actually getting coronavirus under control, the virus itself. I mean, if you look at Brazil and look at Mexico, what's going on there, there are real problems in terms of getting the health side of things right. And then, secondly, are we going to be looking at sort of reshoring of supply chains when all this is over? And what's that going to do to emerging economies? I don't think it's good news for them. So, yeah, I think EM currencies are going to have a bit of a bumpy ride.
Yeah, I think that's true going forward. And also many of the, I think many structural weaknesses in these EM economies are starting to show as well. It's funny enough, like what what they say is that you don't see the weaknesses until something forces you to pay attention to those weaknesses. I mean, South Africa is another prime example where the GDP to debt ratio is starting to go up. You've got a junk rating from all three ratings agencies at the moment. And yes, people are buying stocks at the moment, but the currency, if you look at the actual currency, it's not really appreciating against the US dollar at the moment. Far from it. Even though there's money, there's a demand for rands, obviously, to buy South African stocks. I think what we might actually be seeing is, due to the dual listings that are taking place, some investors might actually want exposure to South African companies, but they buy it via London, because London has so many dual listed companies, and I think we have the most international exchange in the world over here, if I recall correctly. So there's another prime example of where a weak pound is actually bloody good for the stock market, due to the amount of earnings, foreign earnings for companies that are listed and based over here. So it goes both ways. You can actually make money from both moves. Just depends on how you look at it.
Definitely. Yeah. Actually, Mike, a question I wanted to ask you was just because I was thinking it now, Adrian, when you said like a weak pound is good for stocks, and I was thinking back to the day of the referendum, and I remember seeing on the news, pound crashes, and of course it did crash to, I think, was it sub 120, or was it just around 120?
No, I think on the referendum we went from about 150 to about 135-ish from memory. I think it was about 12%, and then it just fell apart the rest of the year.
So it fell obviously by a very large number, but I think at the same time the FTSE on the month, on the year, whatever, it did end up positive. And so where you have these two conflicting barometers, and you're thinking, oh well, stock markets, at least in theory, are supposed to be indicative of economic health and of growth prospects, but at the same time look at the currency and it's the other way around. Obviously it's a sort of idiosyncratic situation where there's lots of dollar exposure to UK companies or whatever, but in the main, what do you prefer as an indicator for economic health? Do you prefer stocks, bonds, currency?
Personally, and I'll keep it brief because I've got a dash in a second, but I would always prefer bonds. I've always, and I use this saying all the time, and it really bugs me because I can't remember who said it, but I heard it before, and it's pros watch the bond market and amateurs trade the stock market, and I think that rings so true. So yeah, in terms of the economy, in terms of what investors think is going on, the bond market will always be where I go first. The stock market, as we know, doesn't necessarily reflect, and especially now doesn't reflect what's going on in the economy, and FX is so distorted by what's going on with central banks that doesn't necessarily reflect it either. So yeah, I mean, my kind of go-to in terms of sentiment around an economy will just be the country's 10-year yield. That will be my first starting point.
I agree with you. I also prefer to watch the bond market now to get a better indication.
Yeah, which is in some ways keeping it very, very simple, but often that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah, not too much overload.
Yeah,
guys, I just want to say
what we were saying earlier.
Yeah, guys, I just want to say thanks so much for this fantastic conversation. I mean, you brought out a lot of things that I think were really important, really relevant, and it's just been a pleasure to have you on as a guest, Mike. And quite honestly, if you ever have another slot again, I would love to have you aboard, because there are so many other things that I think we didn't even get around to discussing. You're a really interesting guy. So thanks for all your time.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
It's been a pleasure. I'll be happy to come on again at some point in the future. Like you said, I think we could probably talk all day. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have yourself a great weekend, and I'll upload this relatively shortly.
Yeah, enjoy.
Cheers, Adrian.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
See you later.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.